Hello, welcome to the Comedians of Wrestling podcast, the podcast where we dissect wrestling to an unhealthy degree. Um, yeah, I skipped doing the intro this week for the listeners, um, because we got kind of a weird week. We had a weird week in professional wrestling, and we're gonna get into it. Um, Before I do, I will say if you want to support the podcast, we have patreon.com/comedians of wrestling. Get access to all of our awesome bonus content. Right now, this week in the Cow Movie Club, we watched a really bad movie, but had a fun conversation about the Escape Plan 2, starring Sly Stallone and Dave Bautista for 4 minutes. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
check that out. And but we are grassroots. Anyway, I'm here with Nancy Newman.
How about it?
How about it? And the First Lady, Erin Finnerty.
What up?
Yeah. And look, continuing with the tradition of 2020 being uh, hands down the worst year in modern history. Um, the wrestling world was been shocked
I wouldn't say
by
shocked.
not shocked, but there's
Rocked.
been yeah. The wrestling world's been rocked. The wrestling world has been turned upside down a bit by this. They're calling it the hashtag Speaking Out movement, which is essentially like wrestling's Me Too movement, right? Um, which it's weirdly, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that wrestling would be like 3 years behind.
Right.
Culturally, like 3 years behind. Unfortunately, which we'll kind of get into. But yeah, many wrestlers and people we really dislike, people that we love, who are wrestlers who are one of my guys, have been called out, and there's some serious allegations about them on Twitter. Now, I guess a lot of this stuff is just to say this up top. Not all this stuff has been substantiated. I think almost every single wrestler has denied these allegations. So this is all just what's coming out through social media. A lot of it looks very credible based on screenshots of DMs and just the quantity of claims for some of
Other
these guys.
people corroborating
Right.
stories with their own tales about the same person.
But there's been no like formal charges brought against any of these wrestlers or anything currently. So just getting that out there. Just to do our due diligence there. But yeah, so look, I think what we could talk about I think maybe we go through some of these specifically to start, and because all these situations are very nuanced, and we're living in a very tricky, nuanced time, and I think the place I'd like to start is with Matt Riddle. So, um, so Matt Riddle, insanely bad timing for the guy, if that even matters, but kind of crazy. This happened the day of his call up to SmackDown. And so what happened with Matt Riddle is that a wrestler, indie wrestler named her name was Candy Cartwright, I believe, and she had said she was having an affair with. She admitted that she was having an affair with Matt Riddle, and had said that there was one specific incident where they were in a van and everyone was sleeping. They're traveling between cities. He had asked her to, quote, hop on his dick. And I'm just saying that because that's what, it's vulgar, but it's what the info we have. And then she said, oh, I don't want to do that because that's embarrassing for me. There's people in the car here. And then she's claiming that he choked her and said, what if I made you do it? And then she ended up giving him oral sex just to kind of calm the situation down. And yeah, there's some screenshots of their interactions. There seems to be the two screenshots I've seen. Let me know if you guys have seen anything different. Was there was a screenshot of just Riddle texting her and saying like, "I can't wait to see you tonight," and like giving his hotel room. And there was a shot of Riddle's wife asking for like screenshots of all their conversations, being like, "You owe me that."
Right.
Right. So, yeah. And then the last thing I'll say before we kind of talk about it and where how you guys feel about this and how this will affect Matt's career, is he put out his lawyer put out a statement essentially being like, this woman essentially saying it was short and it was on labels.
Originally
right?
printed on a sheet of address labels.
Got the top lawyer in Florida and it essentially basically discredit her, kind of like old school, I don't know. I don't have a term for it.
The
I don't know why.
the lawyer's statement said
Completely
that
discrediting her as
completely
like a
discrediting
human.
her and said that they are working on a suit against her for cyber stalking,
Right.
and
Calling her a
both
stalker.
both Matt Riddle and his wife said that she's been cyber stalking him and that she's a quote like crazy person. So that's how
Yeah,
whoa
limed up.
in this economy.
Yeah, I
um,
know. Not great timing for this.
but
But I really
anyways,
did want some lime.
that's more or less what the statements that they put out on their end said.
Yeah. So he's going full on. This didn't happen. The old school, like, discredit the woman. She's nuts. Defense. And then he's going on social media, just going about his life, like posting ab shots and posting his debut and just going about it like, this. Why would anyone believe this woman? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's I mean, I don't know. I'm not even sure where to go with it, but you know, there's obviously no place for any kind of, first off, the physical violence against a woman in wrestling and anything. I mean, if this is proven to be true, which the reality is, it's probably not going to be proven, right?
How do you
Right.
even prove it?
Because that gets kind of to like my main question here, which is like Jack Gallagher, they already let go, right? And it seems to be the kind of thing where I don't have any proof of this, whatever, but that they're kind of like, all right, well, Matt Riddle's kind of very important, so let's try to protect him as much as possible,
Right.
And yeah, but they also know on paper that there's going to be no proof of this, right?
Right.
I mean, there's no video of this incident. She's pointing to one particular incident. So, I mean, they're all kind of just, they're all kind of hoping that we just like forget about it or whatnot,
Right. Or take
Yeah.
their word for it that she's a cyber stalker or whatever the case may be.
I mean, if that's true that she's a stalker, and I'm Matt Riddle, then when I get signed to NXT, I'm saying to them, "Hey, look, and there's this woman. She's da da da."
yeah. Well,
And so like,
disclosing it.
yeah,
Their communications to the second screenshot that had a photo of him saying like, "Oh, can't wait to see you tonight," was from like a year after the incident. So their affair continued after the fact. And her point was, if I'm a cyber stalker and crazy,
right,
then why are you texting me as early as NXT Takeover, whatever, 2019,
right.
that you're
Right.
excited to see me?
With stuff like this and like this particular kind of thing, where because his wife is even saying too, right, that she's a stalker and is discrediting
Yeah,
her,
his
I
wife's
think.
part of it because his wife also, like, he posted a picture of them. They were like out to eat after his debut, and she was like smiling at it, assuming that she
Mhm.
consented to that photo being posted and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? I
Right.
imagine she didn't go like, I can't believe you posted an old picture of us at dinner pretending. I don't think that's the situation because the lawyer letter is also
Right. I guess my point is that, like, so we have the wife corroborating that side of the story, and with things like this where I try to look at everything and I try to decide what's more likely based on other factors, right? And so, like, there is no doubt women who exist who would lie about this sort of thing. Every type of person exists, every type of idea and attitude. There are people with several issues or issues where they behave in a certain way, and it's possible that she is this weird stalker person, right? But then I think, well, there's probably less of those type of people than there are men who are abusers or do abusive things. So it starts to tip over in that direction of, like, I want to give her the benefit of the doubt because just the odds aren't in the favor of that side of the story. Not saying that it's impossible for her to be crazy. It's entirely possible. There's, without naming names, there's a guy we know that I watched a woman yell that he was attacking her when he was literally standing there on the phone with the cops with his arms folded, and she's screaming, he's raping me, he's raping. So, like, people exist like that.
yeah. I mean,
But but I don't think
Jussie
there's
Smollett
as
is a
many of
real
them.
guy. You know, I
Right.
mean, like, I'm just
People,
saying,
right,
talk about one of the craziest things that's ever happened. You know what I mean?
right.
Yeah.
So, of course,
But
I just mean that to
but
prove
I
that point.
don't
But
think
that's
there's
not
as many. I don't think there's as many of those people as there are men who are comfortable doing this type of thing. So that's I end up just being like, well, I have to give her the benefit of the doubt, especially when, like, on this list of people is there are couples, right? And I have it on good word that, like, Joey Ryan and his wife are also this way. What's his face? Cornette and his wife named, right?
right.
So
Right.
just because the wife is corroborating doesn't mean that it's true. And so it's just, for me, as somebody with no power whatsoever to do anything about this, and I'm just kind of
Right.
trying to figure out where I stand uh, morally, I have to give the woman the benefit of the doubt almost every single time, just because of all the other factors that are
Well,
inherent.
yeah, and not only that, but the woman who's making these accusations is a real human being. Like,
Right,
she is a person. I think she's a wrestler. She has her own reputation to uphold, and unless
right,
you are really crazy and that's something you're willing to sacrifice in order to just make this crazy accusation, it's another thing when you are a faceless Twitter account that just hatched 24 hours later and you're making false accusations against Justin Bieber, which
right,
you had to go through a lot of hoops to prove
Right.
that those were fake. It's like, this is a real woman, and
right,
there's probably more on the line for her to come out and speak out than there is to just make some wild story up online.
right.
So in
Yeah.
those
Undoubtedly, yeah.
in those instances,
Yeah.
I always give the benefit of the doubt, because, like, I know guys, and it's just like everyone knows guys, like, they're just like, many of them have this ability, and like you said, there's probably more of those people than there are women who are willing to put their own personal lives on the line to speak out like that. So I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, also, if you look at Matt Riddle, he didn't say I had an affair with this woman, but it was completely consensual. He said she's a stalker. He's basically saying, like, this didn't even happen or whatever, which is, like, also kind of a ridiculous.
Hmm.
That also kind of discredits him to me.
Well, and that's a problem in a lot of these cases. I think this full denial, like, this never happened, this is fake, this is false,
Right.
is a big issue. And I think that it's not the way to go about dealing with this. Like, in some cases that we'll probably talk about, like the Sammy Guevara thing, which is completely different, but
Right.
he did not, I mean, it's on tape, so you couldn't, but he didn't deny that it happened or whatever, like, completely different story, but he owned up to it. And
Right.
I think that owning up to it and not, like, giving this, like, oh, it almost happened, or in my eyes it wasn't this way, or I'm sorry you felt that it was inappropriate, like, that's not right. I think
Right.
that that's not acceptable. I think a way to do it is to say, like, I did this and I'm sorry, and I'm gonna make it better. But the Matt Riddle thing is so like this never happened. Like this is false.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. For me, the thing about well, whatever. We're not gonna be able to prove this happened. It didn't happen. It's just not
Right.
gonna happen if we're just being like fact based. But I think it's pretty clear that he had this like affair, you know.
Yeah.
And I think for me, in terms of like what I liked about Matt Riddle as the guy and the wrestler, his integrity's been massively hit for me
Hmm.
in terms of being a fan. You know what I'm saying? And then also the way he handled this, which I guess if it didn't happen, then in the case it didn't happen, then like arguably he handled it like all right, I guess because it's just like, hey, we're handling this legally, blah blah blah.
Right.
But I tend to believe the way he handled it is kind of just a little. It's a little, it's a little
It's
off putting, you know.
it's
Right.
a little off-putting, and just to have like this lawyer who's I don't even know, like a schmohawk, like printing your
Yeah.
statement crooked on a sheet of labels and throwing up a photo of it. Not even like couldn't even bust out the notes app for this. Like,
He's not
come on,
a top 40 under 40. I'll tell you that much.
Right. You know,
definitely not.
the thing with Riddle is that I don't see how the smart play, except for I don't see how the smart play, and I'm thinking, to be honest, this is kind of like, insensitive and shitty because this is actually like a woman, like to this woman's experience. But wouldn't the smart play to be like, hey, this happened, but it was not, there was no choking, nothing, like that's a complete misunderstanding of what happened there. If he did that, I'm not saying it's better or blah blah blah, but you'd be more inclined to be like, right? You'd be more inclined to be like, all right, maybe they had different accounts of the same sexual encounter, but to just like the flat out denial of it when, like you're saying, it's a real person, that just fishy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not interested in what would be the most clever way to cover it up.
I guess me either, but I'm just trying to
Yeah.
point to. I don't mean it to say which is the most. I'm not.
Right.
I don't mean it that
No,
way.
I
I
know.
only mean it from the way of like his credibility looks bad, worse to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Right,
because of
right,
that.
right.
That's what.
Yeah.
That's how I mean it. I don't mean
It
it.
wasn't just like a shady way to put it off. It was like the most shady way to put it off.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of like the most insensitive way, like
Right.
to this like person who you potentially hurt. Because I feel pretty confident saying that he had a relationship with her. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
100%.
So even in that way, in that regard, Anyway, yeah, I get whatever. And we don't need to like go through each of these, blah blah blah. You guys can read them. I'm just gonna riddle the. Hey, probably the
Hey.
one joke of the episode. There it is. I'm gonna riddle these off. Um, uh, and because I want to have a more broader discussion about wrestling, but I wanted to get this information out there for people that didn't know. So Joey Ryan, I mean, is one of the other big guys, and I'd known about Joey Ryan's behavior I had heard, not known firsthand, obviously. I had kind of heard a little bit about this, that he was not to the extent that we know, but I had heard he's kind of a creep, you know.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing with Joey Ryan, if you can read the accounts of all these women, there's like 16 women or something. Basically, Joey Ryan, I feel comfortable saying is like a rapist, you know?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he's like full on a predator, all these stories, 16-year-old girls. Even in his apology, he says like, I was living a rock star lifestyle from his dick flip going viral, which is like, I've had a viral video. I
Yeah,
don't like
Dan,
go
you
like
can
time to
relate.
live rock star, like, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's just fucking weird to think like, oh,
Yeah.
because I had a viral, because my career's going well, I'm allowed to hook up with 16-year-old
Yeah.
girls.
Yeah.
Also, like, imagine Led Zeppelin in a fucking hotel room, like, oh, mate, my tweet got 1 million likes, and now I'm gonna molest this girl because of it. Like, a rock star? Like, come on.
I
Didn't Led
know.
Zeppelin all hook up with like 16-year-old girls all the time? They
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
shared
yeah,
16.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah,
no
yeah.
point in talking about that. Yeah.
Everyone, Bowie, even Bowie was,
It
yeah.
was a different time. It was a different time.
Yeah, and like
Well,
to say
litigating the
like,
past is an interesting thing, but yeah. What?
my viral video is the reason why like I went into this like predatory lifestyle. It's like, come on. Like, do you think like David, the is this real life
Dan,
kid
David.
is no, is the kid on nitrous, like the is this real life boy is
Oh,
like
right.
Yeah.
living like a big pimpin' lifestyle. Like I
I
don't
was thinking
think
about that
so.
I was thinking about that kid the other day. So funny. Is this real
Is
life?
this real life?
Really funny. That is really funny. But you
He's
know
a
what?
sweet
I
boy.
just want to say a couple things. I don't really like when people not that I don't like it in terms of I see why it's funny thing to point out, but I don't really like people being like, this was his gimmick and you didn't see this coming. Like you can play like a creep character and not be a
Right.
creep. This is one thing
Obviously,
that I
yeah.
really have I take umbrage with is people thinking like now it's like all of our art needs to represent us as like a person. Like these guys are actors.
Yeah.
And especially WB wrestlers are handed scripts from Vince, right?
Right.
So like
Right.
so I just mean in that way. Like I don't think that because he did that, I'm sure that led him to like think of the idea, but like. I just don't like those issues being conflated, but yeah, Joey Ryan. Now the big problem with Joey Ryan, and goes to the Cornette thing as well. The big problem with Joey Ryan is a big problem we see in wrestling, and it kind of even relates to like my comments that I thought in the Undertaker documentary are super weird about the wrestling. Like there's a real power dynamic problem in pro wrestling, which comes from kind of the how small of a world it is and the amount of gatekeepers who are like bad actors in this industry that no one really gives a shit about.
Mhm.
I mean, for example, look at wrestling right now. We've talked about this they're saying now they're reporting that they think up to 24 WB employees and in-ring talent have coronavirus, have tested positive.
Right.
So, which we knew was going to happen. They're in Florida. We have this truly moronic governor over there deemed wrestling corruptly an essential business. We know about that, but it's like there's because like with NBA everything's under the microscope, right? Like my dad calls me, he's like, this is the NBA's plan. They're gonna play all the games in Orlando. How's that gonna work? Blah blah. Like everyone is scrutinizing all these other
Right.
sports leagues' plans to open up. Wrestling people they don't care about it, right? So it's unregulated. I think that's like the whole trickle down of the thing is that it's in this weird spot in society, like the circus carny area, where like it's in like this pocket of even though it's this like big billionaire like publicly traded company, it's in this like gray area of obscurity where there's a real blind eye turn to all the bad behavior happening,
Mhm.
and also it also like is a there's also like it's like basically there's like a monopoly going on essentially. I mean now you have AEW, you have a couple other places to wrestle, but there's if you're wrestling PWG or like bar wrestling out here, Joey Ryan ran bar wrestling. So if you're a SoCal indie wrestler getting on bar wrestling and Joey Ryan sexually assaults you, you're gonna say no to this guy. You'll never wrestle on bar wrestling. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and I just think it's like even when I'm in it, like I'm processing this thought, but like even it was like Taker being like, "Oh, I'll do anything for Vince." He flies home to get his gear on the day.
Right.
You're like,
Right.
these wrestlers need unions. They need protection. They need protection.
Yeah.
I
Like
just killed a spider.
actors. Yeah.
Sorry. So
And-
scary.
yeah, the spiders can be freaky sometimes, but right, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's not it's kind of not there's kind of like it doesn't matter how high of a level you are in wrestling, like there's like a behavior of like here's how you act, and I'm not surprised that there's this like pattern because like Jim Cornette, forget to him, he was booking OVW. People are and anything about Jim Cornette, I believe his
Right.
character is a zero. He has zero credibility to me. The guy is
Right.
a walking pile of trash to me. This guy is every ist in the book. He could have the Bianca Belair gimmick of like racist.
I'm the
sexist,
IST.
The IST.
the IST. Well, there's the second joke. I can't help myself. But I'm saying, they're saying he had to. You had to basically you had to trade sexual favors by having sex with his wife to get booked in OVW. OVW is a direct line to WWE. Like your whole life's work relies on getting matches in OVW.
Right.
At the time, if you remember, OVW's right. Cena. You watch all the videos. Cena, Ziggler, Batista. They all Orton. They're all OVW guys. You know.
Yeah, I think my assumption about all this stuff with the sort of structural
Right.
abuses of, or rather the abuses of structural power. Anytime there's a hierarchy, ever, um, there's going to be the possibility for abuse. I think then you factor in there are the various reasons why you find men at the tops of these hierarchies, and then the types of ways that men are capable of abuse because of the inherent threat of violence uh, due to, on average, the difference in size and
Right.
strength and stuff like that, right? And so what happens then is all these other factors create the conditions in not just wrestling, and literally every time there's any kind of top-down hierarchy or there's a position of power or gatekeeping in place, it's likely, therefore, that it's going to be a guy, and then therefore likely that if they do abuse that power, it's going to be sexual in nature. And so, yeah, you just end up, no matter where you look, with these sort of things in place and these things happening, because it's all these other factors that contribute to power being abused this way. Who's in power? Why is that type of person in power? How do they typically abuse power? And then it's just replicated everywhere.
Yeah,
Right.
not only that, but it like trickles down. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
if you're a wrestler and if you're a male wrestler and there's a man who has power over you, but maybe you think you're the shit, it empowers you to then take advantage of people who are beneath you, whether it's other talent or women, fans,
Right.
up and coming
I mean, fucking
talent.
Randy Orton, right? Like, he's all woke now with the Black Lives Matter stuff, but like he, for all intents and purposes, sexually assaulted writers, right? When he takes his dick out and waves it at them and makes them shake his hand, that's in my eyes not much different than whatever Joey Ryan's doing or Jim Cornette's doing. It's the same type of psychological sexual abuse in the
Right.
workplace, no less.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, taking your dick out, which it couldn't be more of a fireable offense, you know.
Right.
Yeah, if he did that in like a conference room at like a regular job, forget
He
Right.
did it in the Money in the Bank room in the fucking Titan Towers.
Right.
Yeah.
But for me, I know it's like this is not popular opinion and whatnot, but like if he's just doing that as like if we're talking about like hazing, even though like that involves his actual penis, but I think none of it was actual sexual in nature. It was more like to humiliate writers and whatnot, like from what I remember. Like Orton was
Ooh.
like he would like shit in your bag. Like it's terrible. It should
Right.
not be
But
tolerated.
I guess but I would also say that
Yeah.
rape isn't sexual, and I probably misspoke when I said sexual in nature. It's about it's power. It's about exercising this power over somebody to humiliate them or to make yourself feel powerful. And so
Right.
I think when you strip it down to its components, if it's an individual uh, abusing either the perceived or real position of power that they're in order to humiliate and objectify somebody, then there's not much daylight between like what Orton does and what like these other people that we're talking about are doing.
Right. Right.
So it's
but
never sexual. It's always a power thing.
right, but there is a line at sexual over
Yeah. Well,
over right there's kind of a line there just from the point where of no return. And the only reason
Right.
I mean that, the only reason I say that is kind of like if we're gonna live in I'm not if we're living in cancel culture, right? I don't even know if we're formally all calling that. Like before we had a term for it on this podcast, I used to be like, I randomly was like, oh, I'm not into exile culture. I remember.
Right.
And then like now we have cancel became more the word. If that, then like there has to be some kind of line towards like redemption, or we're just discarding, people, which is is. I mean, there's a line, right? Like a guy like Joey Ryan can fucking rot in hell. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like he's not. We don't need him. He doesn't deserve to be wrestling. You know what I mean? It's like my problem with, especially because a lot of times it's with other wrestlers. You know, that's another issue is that like it's my problem when you hear about uh, comedians on female comedians, right? Like the thing with like Louis, you know,
Hmm.
where you're like, for me, something that really bothers me, you know, you can make the argument, oh, all he did was just jerk off in front of these women, blah blah blah. But the thing that like bothers me is that like, oh well, I can, you know, they're comedians. They're other comedians. Forget about their gender, their sex, whatever.
Right.
Like it's like, oh, you don't even see them as comedians, you know?
Yeah.
And
Wasn't
these
he
are other
there?
same things. A lot of these wrestlers, like with Joey Ryan, it's like they're trying to come up and wrestle, you know?
Right.
Right.
And I mean, similarly too, I think the Louis C.K. thing is also a workplace situation as well. And
Right,
in this case, the clubs are the workplace of these female comedians, and then therefore, if he's being booked at clubs, then with women on the bill, now they're in their workplace with this predator. You
Well,
know,
yeah,
yeah,
it's in a lot of these cases like Louis C.K., it's like a dangling of opportunity type situation. Like two of the women that he I think jerked off in front of or whatever were people he was kind of baiting with opportunity to tag along and
right?
have his help. And last year or the year before, Ryan Adams, who was previously my favorite singer songwriter of all time, was outed by the New York Times for dangling opportunity in front of young female musicians and essentially doing the same thing and stifling his wife's musical career along the way. And so, you know, Dan said, is there like a path to redemption for some of these
was
people?
he Mandy Moore? Was he married to Mandy Moore?
Yeah, he was, and she divorced him, and he was
Right,
not a good husband. And the path to redemption, unfortunately, it's like, well, it's long. Like, there's
right,
Yeah.
no apology. It's for Ryan, for Louis C.K. I don't think that he has any interest in it because he's gone out on tour and joked about it and been very insensitive in a lot of ways. And you know, I just don't see it happening, and I'm fine
right,
with that. But you know, Ryan, I think you have to show that you've changed and make strides towards being a better person. And it's hard because now we're entering this time where it's like, well, the Ryan Adam things happened like 2
right,
years ago, and I see online like he's trying to do better, but I still have a hard time reconcile. Like I want to like forgive and like listen to his music again and be happy about it like I used to be, but it's really hard to kind of figure out where the end of that line of redemption is. You know what I mean? So
Well,
I think it's going to be hard going forward to see where these people end up and how long it takes and when society and fans are ready to forgive these
right,
people.
right.
yeah, but I think that
But
the
the interesting thing, oh, sorry, I just want to say one thing before I forget. But
yeah,
it's just like Sammy Guevara thing, right? Because I just want to bring that up there. I find it really interesting because everyone is on board saying the Sammy Guevara thing. We all agree is not a fireable offense. It is a 20-year-old kid saying something very stupid, very insensitive, and he owned up to it, said he was sorry. But I worry that if all this other stuff wasn't called out, it, that we would have been like, we gotta get, the reaction would have been way harsher. Do you know what I mean? Like that there's a dulling of it because we have literally now he's compared to rapists at the at the same time
Well, and this
simultaneously.
here's
And maybe I'm wrong. I'm putting that out there for
I
you guys.
agree, but I think that smart move is that he talked to Sasha Banks, and Sasha Banks, her statement I think was the most compelling piece in the whole thing was because
Right.
she got to say her piece. She talked to him one on one. They had a conversation, which is, you know, a really meaningful thing because you don't see any of these other kind of accused predators talking to their victims and then both releasing a statement like that. So I think that was really smart. And
And
the
also,
other
go ahead, sorry.
problem with him is he said it on a podcast and no one else in the room stopped him or questioned it at all, which, you know, if this wasn't happening, that podcast might just get buried. You know, no one would have even thought about it. It would have been enabled and fine. But, you know, this is a learning moment for him. And I think that the fact that he sorted things out with Sasha, and obviously he wouldn't have gone to her with his tail between his legs like that if he didn't feel remorse. So, not a fireable offense, but I think he still has like probably just, more growing up to do.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And also, I just want to say one thing is that likely Sammy was coached by AEW, like Tony Khan, Cody. I don't have any proof of this on what they think he should do. And I think I'm not, listen, I know this is always a hot button issue, and I'm not really sure why everyone, it's like if we give AEW any moral cred, people have such a problem with that. It's like we're
Right.
not saying they're perfect at all, but I do think this set, if you look at Tony Khan's handling of the Hulk Hogan thing, like they and just their initiatives in general, um I think it's like, oh, well, here's how this will be handled. It seems like they're committed to handling these things in a way that feels a little less, I don't know, maybe I'm getting worked, but it was a little less PR-y. Like, I felt like Sammy legitimately had a learning experience, you
Right.
know? Like, based on what he said, he took all the correct, like you're saying, all the correct steps, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think so. To your first thing, Dan, about
Yeah,
like it's a 20-year-old kid saying something stupid, right? And it's sort of like a gas leak, right? Like a gas leak isn't the thing that is making the house on fire. The
right,
fire is doing that. But if you don't get rid of gas leaks, then there's always the potential for a fire. And
right,
so with stuff like this, it's like, yeah, it's just it's adding to the normalization of the environment where a guy can say something like that, and another guy's like, well, okay, interesting take, and then moves on because to him that's normal, right? Like it's like a fish in water, and it's
yeah,
that culture. That's like you're seeing the culture of like rape culture itself. You're not seeing these the like actual acts of
right,
abuse. You're seeing the mycelium from which this stuff fucking grows, which is just a environment. Um, and then to the point of like the long hard road to redemption. It's the hardest part about it is that it's really truly only between the accuser and the accused, and whether or not they work it out between them. It has to be unconditional in the mind of the person seeking forgiveness. It can't be attached to their ego. It can't be attached to them getting their career back. It can't be attached to them being back in public favor. It can't be attached to anything but working out whatever it is between you and the person that you hurt, them forgiving you or not, and then maybe you get your life back, or maybe you don't. But it can't be attached to that thing because, or to anything else other than you doing personal work to make yourself better. And part of that is accepting that you don't have a right to have the same job forever, right? Like no one has the right to be a stand-up comedian. No one has the right just to, because you were a wrestler once, now you always have to be a wrestler. Like sometimes you fuck up and that ruins your life. And if you want forgiveness, you get it from the person you need it from, and everything else is completely out of your control. There's no perfect apology. It has to just be for it to be for the real reasons and the right reasons. It can't be attached to anything other than you and the person you hurt.
right. Um, Right. But well, absolutely. And him and Sasha, they handled it, and she
Right.
accepted his apology, right?
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah. Um yeah, so anyway, I mean, yeah, as a comedian, I get very defensive about uh canceling people over words. You know what I mean? I'll always be kind of like, I know it's tricky. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
there are things that can't be said. There are always going to be lines and whatnot. And also, if you're not a comedian, you know what I mean? If you're not a comedian, it's then like Sammy Guevara wasn't trying to be like he might have been trying to be funny, but
So I want to
wasn't
actually
like
ask you
on
this
stage
question.
telling a joke. You know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah.
trying to be funny. Like, 'cause I'm just saying the thing that's tricky is that like I don't know. I'm going to comedy. It's pretty frustrating how how it feels like comedy is like such a target. Where comedy is a place where it's just like most people have not tried to do it,
Right.
and it's very vulnerable to do it. You know what I mean? And so you're like, oh, I really have this idea. I don't know if it's funny. And like you get up there and you might even say it confidently because you're trying to sell it. And then from the democracy of getting no laughs, that like, oh wow, that did not work. I did not feel good. I don't like that. That's not who I am. And you're part of you finding your voice. And I also think comedy is just free speech, So it's kind
Right.
of tricky. Where like, and then especially when you see like the president, you know what I mean? You see like actual politicians saying like these terrible things. People will make actual policy. Now you can make the argument kind of that like that are those lines blurring? Like, what's his name? Why am I forgetting his name? Al Franken, I mean, are people are becoming politicians and whatnot. So it's like,
Right.
is that so? But you know, I don't know
How do
why
you
I'm making it
differentiate?
about that necessarily, but that's
Right.
that's,
But how do you differentiate between what is the difference in your eyes between somebody on stage with prepared material
right,
and then they say they're trying to push some sort of envelope to see, can I find something funny in this kind of like dark idea, and it bombing?
right,
And why do they, I guess, what's the difference between them and somebody just telling like a joke on a podcast who isn't technically a comedian? Because why would a stand-up get more protection under free speech than somebody like, well, I have these days have a hard time telling the difference. Like, what's the
right,
difference between, why would a stand-up, like, what's different between a stand-up and somebody just making a joke? Because that person can just be like, oh, I was just joking,
right.
and assume that they're given the same artistic freedom that a stand-up or a comic is given. And
Yeah.
so, but
There's
why
no
shouldn't they?
there's really no good like answer for that. I can come back on you and be, because I know what you're saying, and that's the
Right.
tricky thing with comedy is that everyone's a comedian. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like everyone, so it's like everyone. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you want to
Right.
be like, well, everyone's able to do this thing. It's not like, oh, I'm not a wrestler. You know what I mean? So I
Right.
can't be like, I was just wrestling. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like I punch you in the face and then I'm like, oh, sorry, I was just wrestling. Like that,
Right. Right.
right? You can't do it. So that's the tricky thing with comedy. And I think that's why it's such a hotbed of controversy because it's like they're, and, uh, I think that it's just it's just tricky. Like I know someone who gets I'm friends with someone on social media who gets like really offended by stuff and I feel like they always miss the point. They're not in comedy. They're and she kind of like always is like I'm always like it's frustrating. I always want to be like, "Oh, that is truly just a joke." You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that is
Right.
truly. But then I'm like, well, but it was hurtful to her. So then you're like, well, do you just have to be a comedian? Do you have to just be like, well, I thought it was funny and that's it? And you have to put up those walls, Like
Right.
what is happening now with, uh, you know, whatever. I'm veering so off from the wrestling, but I
Right.
think that I don't have a great answer for you. You know what I mean?
Right.
I,
And
I
so,
don't
and I'm
think
not
that.
saying that either way. I'm not saying that like, I'm not making I don't know how to think, right? It's something I've been thinking for a long time, just in terms of
Well,
like,
there is
there's
one thing that I think we can talk about, which is that, like, are you doing something in character? I think that's something we're starting to lose also. It's like,
right.
if somebody's playing a character, then that's the views of that character, right? I think that's
Right.
something that's like automatically we could be like, so that's the tricky thing about sketch and improv in that way,
Right.
Um, and I do think also we have to like try to judge as much as we can on kind of character, really. I feel like
Right.
you could kind of tell. That's like always the X factor for me is like intent. Is like, uh, can you kind of judge? And again, you can't regulate this. It's just feeling. But can you judge like, oh, that person is just they you could tell that didn't come from a hateful place.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess we're getting kind of off topic, but
We're getting off
uh
topic, but I do think to spin it back into what we are talking about
yeah.
is right. We veered off into comedy pretty easily, thing
Right.
is this a wrestling problem? I want to talk about wrestling in general. I'll be straight up. Like, I got um people are like, I'm not watching right now, and I'm like, oh, it's because of COVID and whatnot. But you know, you're like, we know that wrestling. It's like, I joke. I'm like, yeah, okay. Wrestling has kind of a toxic atmosphere around it, or whatever, like kind of a vibe. It also has like a bad reputation, as being like, like you bring up Orton, right? Like that's what you think of. You think of that kind of culture. Um, uh, but these problems are not wrestling problems. These are problems across the board.
It's a
I
society problem.
explained why they are specific to wrestling. Like what the problem I see with the structure of wrestling is that there's it seems to be like a lot of gatekeepers, and that's, there's similarities in comedy there also, but also comedy's more under the microscope, like you see. So a lot of problems
Right.
with comedy get called out publicly, but wrestling, no one cares about it. So this stuff is going to go even more hidden,
Right. Yeah, it's allowed to fester.
But I guess when it comes down to this, it's like, at what point we have this happen and we have Saudi, like at what point I dream of a world where I can kind of guiltlessly watch wrestling, because there's an element of wrestling where there's a lot we turn the blind eye to when we watch professional wrestling. And it's always thrown in our face. People say it to us all the time. It's just like, people are like, how do you watch it when this? How do you watch it when that? How do you watch it like that? And I think the answer is because of I really respect the art form of wrestling. Like that's the thing I try to tell. That's what I try to always express to people. It's like I see wrestling is so much bigger than the WWE.
Right.
Vince is a pioneer of wrestling. Um, uh, but yeah, like the art of wrestling in its purest form is amazing. Like I don't want it to die.
Right.
I mean, like there's problematic painters, there's problematic everything, and all.
Well,
and
yeah, you're
all,
not going to stop listening to music because Ryan Adams is a piece of shit.
right,
Right.
right. But so I do think when people criticize like why with AEW, like, oh, this feels like a company that is a little more modern, right, or like
Yeah.
progressive in that way. I do think everyone has this hope that this will be a show I can watch that more aligns with my personal morals.
Right.
And I think like pointing out like, oh, they also still wrestled during COVID and this and that. You're like, you could equate them, but doing that is like you're doing what like the press secretary will do for Trump. Like
Right.
throw it back and whatnot. Like the intention, if you're going back to intent, people's intent is like to watch wrestling without this cloud.
Right. Right. But I mean, and two, like I said this a couple weeks ago, if the only thing if I say I'm not watching WWE because of X, right? And the only response you have is, well, you better stop watching AEW and all the wrestling too, because there's this, that, and the
I
other
know.
thing. All you're saying is that you recognize there is a problem with all of it and you don't give a shit.
Right.
That's it. It doesn't make me wrong. It makes me more right. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Well,
like
one of
Yeah.
one of our listeners, I wrote this post being like, I dream of watching wrestling like guiltlessly, and
as
he
opposed to
wrote,
shamelessly, which is what some people are doing.
right, and he was like, oh well, he's like, I do that now already. There's problems in every company, like I'm completely fine with it. And I was
No,
like,
you don't
well,
watch
that's just not-
guilt-free. You watch without shame because you have none. There's a difference.
I think that's true. I think you just put that perfectly. I was like, I don't like yeah, I mean, I don't, I'm at a loss for words, I mean, how
Yeah.
many, it's like, how's WB going to handle this, I mean, they need yeah.
They're not going to because there's enough people who don't care.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. So I looked at Matt Riddle's posts and I was looking at the comments, and most of them are like, you're the man. Like most of them. some
course.
of them are even like, it's ridiculous what this woman's trying to do to you. There's some of those there, and then there's the occasional like you're a rapist one, but they're few and far between from what I saw.
Those have not gotten deleted yet. Those have not been filtered because I'm
Mhm.
sure
Oh, he's deleting them.
I'm speculating, but there's no way that I just can't see how
Right.
those comments could be in the minority when you're posting an ab pic the day after you've been accused of like a sexual assault. Like,
Right.
I've looked at the tweets and I read the replies, and it, you know, is kind of almost split down the middle, but I'm sure
Oh,
that they're
okay.
on some sort of like PR bonanza trying to
Right.
protect Matt Riddle on social media and try to maintain his reputation. So wouldn't be surprised.
I'm going to humbly suggest a solution, right? We're talking a
Right.
lot about problems. Let's talk. I'm going to put forth a possible solution,
Love
or
it.
at least a step towards a solution. Going to go back to the Sammy Guevara situation, right?
Yeah.
I think that is the perfect opportunity to exercise the type of thing that will. So the problem is that the environment is such that people like this are comfortable being in a wrestling scene, in a music scene, in a whatever, right? They're comfortable because no one ever, when they make the little joke or they say something to their buddy, like, oh, look at the tits on this one, right? They are never met with any pushback. No one's ever like, hey, that's fucked up. Don't say that, because they
Right.
don't want to make them uncomfortable. And so in that moment, if that podcast host had been like, what the fuck did you just say? And made him uncomfortable, you're forcing people to either exile themselves because they don't want to deal with that kind of scrutiny all the time, and you make the environment toxic for toxic people by making it safe for everybody else and letting them know, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm not going to hear your shitty joke. I'm going to call you out on it and possibly mock you back and make you feel like a piece of shit, so that it's not going to fly here. And the more that people do that, I'll say the more men do that for and at other men, especially men that we're friends with and close with, and start to do that work to purify these spaces, nothing will ever change. And it has to be in these little moments where somebody says some fucked up shit and you go, you know what, that was fucked up, don't say that again. And you just start to foster a different environment because they're thriving in the current one.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that I kind of go back to the Hogan thing,
Mm-hmm.
The Hogan, the New Day didn't really take his apology. I mean, not that it's about the New Day or whatever, per se, but I'm saying they were, the most prominent black wrestlers in WWE, and they were kind of like, I remember their statement. I might be incorrect, but I remember them putting on a statement being like, it's cool for us to still like celebrate Hulkamania. We just don't, we like separate it from the guy. Like, he's not going to take Hulkamania away from us. You know what I mean? And you're like,
Right.
oh, well, and then like he had like apologized backstage, but he kind of felt like no, he did what, as far as you can go, especially when it comes to just language, right?
Right.
And he felt like no obligation to really handle it. He had this amazing
No,
opportunity. And so that's
because
kind
he
of what.
wanted something else. He wanted his career back. He wanted the limelight. He didn't want to just make things okay between him and the people he hurt. He
Right.
wanted other things. His apology was never for the people. It was for him to get his life back, to get his status back. And so that's why they probably didn't accept it.
Yeah. Well, I don't really know this whole thing is such a mess because, I mean, this list is not small. I mean, this
It
list
is
is like,
very
it's like
long and it's
100
getting
wrestlers.
longer. Every time I look at it or go on Twitter, there's a new post with new accusations. And some people maybe I've never heard of, but all in the same vein. And it's crazy how it runs this kind of spectrum of different types of like violations, from hard rape, sexual assault, to manipulation and like verbal psychological abuse, all this stuff. And it's just so prevalent, and there's so many people being accused that it's clearly like a super toxic environment, for, I mean, men and women, but for these victims.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like we obviously can't speak to all these specific situations. They're
Yeah.
all extremely specific, and it's kind of like, like David Starr thing. I just saw like a little bit of it. I couldn't even really make heads or tails of it because
Yeah, I followed that one for a little while.
it was like, right,
He was just a yeah, it was most of the accusations came from an ex, and he kind of like wrote the longest notes posts I've ever seen in my life, trying to backpedal and like further gaslight this woman who was speaking out about the way he treated her, and it was just worthless. He's a sack of shit too.
right. And then some with Marty Skrull too, and Will Osprey. The Osprey thing I didn't even see.
Those I haven't followed. I haven't read
Yeah,
the specifics.
right. Well, whatever. I mean, it's kind of hard to even look at, but you're like, well, all these wrestlers. I mean, some of these are guys that, let's say, every wrestler that was named was deleted from wrestling, just for lack of a better, like, you know. I mean, these are massive holes in
Right.
the in wrestling. It's not going to happen. Like all these wrestlers are not going to go away, and the varying degrees of this stuff, it's going to be, none of them are like provable criminally. I mean, maybe Joey Ryan could get like similar, like Harvey Weinstein.
Like
Like,
charges
you might be able
filed
to get
against him.
actual like rape charges and whatnot, but a lot of the stuff's like psychological abuse, blah blah blah. But probably ultimately this needed to happen in this world. Uh, these guys they're just going out on the road and just wrestling in these like auditoriums, and you know what I mean? It's just kind of like the Wild West, really.
Hmm.
So
I just want to say one thing too, because I want to make it clear that like something I truly, truly believe is that there isn't, setting aside the obviously complicated discussions about gender and sex, whatever you want to call the male organism and the female organism in terms of like a human being, right? There's like this type of body and this type of body, right? There's nothing inherent about a male person, and there's nothing inherent about a female person. Any person can be any type of attitude or anything regardless, right? I think everybody's sort of a blank slate, and I'm a
right,
big believer that they're then molded by the material conditions in which they exist. And I think that that's the reason. So you have these ideas of like masculinity or these ideas of femininity, and what we do is we say, oh, masculine belongs to male-bodied people, feminine belongs to female-bodied people, and then there's expectations that go along with those
right,
roles that we've invented, right? And one of those expectations of masculinity is this like sort of conquering, overwhelming, take what's yours, the world is belongs to you, and then the ideas associated with femininity are yielding and drawing in and enveloping, and it's all this way, right? It goes all throughout Eastern religion, yin and yang, right? But my point is this: it's about these ideas and the culture that comes from these ideas, that says in order to survive in this place, you have to assert yourself and be dominant. And that's why you find things like Bea Priestley is on that list, and you find things like what's her name, Blanchard, right? She's like, yeah,
right,
she got called out a while ago, and what you find is it's like you could say on paper, oh, they're behaving like the men are behaving, but really it's
right,
because they're behaving the way that male-bodied people are conditioned to behave on the pretenses of masculinity, which is a thing we've completely invented. Um, and so I just want to make it clear that I'm not ever at any point saying like the problem is men, right? Or the problem
right,
is whatever. The problem is the culture that comes from these ideas that we then say, oh, if you're a man, you have to be this way. Uh, and it's feminists call it the patriarchy, people call it different things, but there's an obvious system in place that says this is how this should be, this is how it's going to be, and you conform or die in a lot of situations.
right. Yeah, I mean that's why you're saying like, is this a wrestling thing or blah blah blah? Like, I think in a way you're kind of saying that culturally it is.
I mean, culturally, no, it's a culture problem across the board.
Right,
And like I said before, whether you put it, you're going to find it in wrestling, you're going to find it in government, you're going to find it in entertainment, anytime there is a hierarchy with people at the top, it's Machiavelli, man. They're going to abuse their power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you give somebody power, depending on all these other factors, it's going to determine how or when or why they abuse it, or if.
Well,
Right?
also, I also believe that, and I think this is actually something that's pretty discussed, which is that like a lot of CEOs are like psychopaths and sociopaths
Yeah.
and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
There's a certain personality type that seeks that kind of power at all costs,
Right.
like a Trumpian style person, you know,
And a
like
system that rewards it directly.
right. And so I've always, you know, I've seen this. I've seen, you know, I don't, not with any like sexual allegations, blah blah blah, but I've seen this like personality type. If I put it into a category, I've seen it, and when I see it, I try to actively match it. You know what I mean? Not like match
Right.
it with the same kind of be the same, but I'm like, oh, I know this person is so nuts that they'll fucking roll over me if I
Right.
don't, if I allow it. You know what I mean? And so I think that's you know, if you want to break it down, it's like, if you want to talk about Trump for a second, I'm just using him as the example. It's like you see his level of extreme behavior. He has no morals to kind of go anywhere. That behavior is rewarded in our society, right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of just like megalomania is, people don't know how to handle it, and it just kind of slips through the crack of success because you're like, I'm not sure how to put a kibosh on this in a way.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
and I do think that's why like the other side needs to not match it, meaning like you have to act like him. I don't know. I know I'm going morally, but you have to rise to. You have to be at the same height, if that makes
Right.
sense or something, right? Like, and you have to do it however you'll do it morally, but you can't like you can't be below it because you're holding on to because you're trying to be rational. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's really what it is. Is like there's like an
Right.
irrational hunt for power from some of these people, and it's what tricks people. I think it's like
Mhm.
you get tricked by trying to rationalize the irrational, and then while you go, oh, here's how I'm going to handle this, they irrationally go around you,
Right.
like while
They're
you're
not
trying
going
to
to play by rules.
compartmentalize.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Well,
I
how
always
do
think
you-
that's kind of like how it goes, you know?
Yeah, well, I guess like in Trump's administration and in the WWE, it's like, well, how do you match that person when you run the risk of being fired or penalized like immediately for doing that?
Well, look at
Because
like
Trump will let you go, Vince will bury you. You know, I think that fear is also
Jim Cornette. Like I think this will tie into what you're saying. It's like Jim Cornette, his behavior's absurd. He says the most fucked up, disgusting, vile shit that has a negative impact on our society, like actively makes America worse.
Yeah.
But if you want to look at it, every time I pop on my YouTube, it's like Jim Cornette says, right? Like he makes headlines, he's rewarded, right?
Right.
He gets clicks. People talk about what he said, right? And not even just because it's like kind of provocative, it's because what he says is so vile, like it's so out of bounds of like what is like civil discourse, right? That like,
Right.
and so what I'm saying is the way I think the way you combat it is kind of honestly like where and maybe I'll eat these words later, but he's kind of what Cody is up to a little bit. I know this is like kind of like insane. We're going from like Trump to wrestling, but he is unapologetically like I'll smash the chair, I'll talk shit about WWE. Like he will stoop,
Right.
but like they will stoop, but then also they show you what they stand for or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right.
So I know that's like kind of a micro way, but like there is a way to be like loud and proud while still upholding morality. But listen, this as long as social media is a thing, there's going to be rewards for being gross. You're being
Right.
terrible. You know?
Well, I mean, that's why I think I talk about things like the swamp, and I openly mock people who I think are shitty, because I think I'm not going to be civil. Being civil is not in my DNA, right? And I'm going to mock you, and I'm going to make fun of you, and I'm going to try to get other people to make fun of you
Right.
so that you feel bad. And I think that, like, to that point, like, if Cody is going after WWE and is, like, mocking them, I think that even then in comedy, like, there needs to be maybe another way to correct this, is to make the meme that no one likes this. No one wants you around if you're going to be this way. This is not your place. This is not for you.
Right.
Put them back on the out group, where they belong until they figure their shit out.
Yeah, it just gets, I mean, it gets tricky because then you're also like, we're talking about giving unions to wrestling, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh,
Right.
well, the more rules you put on it, does it sterilize the insanity of wrestling and the craziness? Do you start having a union? Can you have like that match? Well, it had Joey Ryan in it, but like, can you wrestle in the PWG? Like, if they're like in like the American Legion Hall where it all started, like that was like max occupancy. It's like, well, the union says like you can't, and this guy's a union wrestler, he can't do the show, and you know what I mean? Like, you can't. There can't be this much blood. The match has to stop if there's blood. You know what I'm saying? Is like there is an element of regulation that is like always kind of scary to me when you're talking about art,
Right.
But as it stands right now, uh, wrestling seems to be in such a kind of a no man's land that I think that there's such a discrepancy between how wrestlers at the top are treated and wrestlers at the bottom. It's a little too like classist in a way,
Right.
to the point where like it feels like if you're a low, like it seems scary to be a low level independent female wrestler, like is starting out. That seems
Yeah.
like a scary place to be. That shouldn't be good. There should be a society, these wrestlers should be protected, and other wrestlers should have been protecting these women from Joey Ryan. If I knew that, if I had I didn't know, but I had kind of heard some stuff. Imagine the people who stood around and were like, "That's I don't want to that's just how he does it," or like, "I don't want to lose my spot being booked
Right.
because of that," So something
Right.
something needs to happen that this can't perpetuate. Because right now, but also it's extremely difficult because nothing about wrestling is showing that it's moving out of this no man's land that it's in.
Right. Right. I mean, it's almost too. It's like we talk about psychos and like their ability to climb this ladder, and I
Right.
think it's like in general, I've said this before in the podcast, a great way to be successful is in this dimension that we live in
Right.
is to align all of your actions with your self-interest and your self-interest alone. And if everything you do is for you only, and how does it benefit you, and you will seek to benefit yourself no matter the cost, you will shoot up whatever ladder you're trying to climb.
Yes, it's exactly. Yeah. That's
You
a
know,
good way to say it.
and I think that you then have people who are truly like they're monstrous, right? And they're willing, like the Trumps, right, who are willing to actively align themselves or align their actions with their self-interest. And then you have other people who are just trying to conform and trying to move up a ladder, trying to be a wrestler in some
Right.
little city, and they're then trying to align their self-interest by not speaking up. They're saying, well, it's more important, my career is more important to me than speaking up and defending this other person. But they're already outpaced, they're out psychoed by the psychos, and all that's then doing is making the psychos more powerful. It's not helping them. But they're still, because they're trying to do the thing. They're trying to play the game the way the psychos are playing, and all it's doing is making it worse.
Right.
Metaphysically speaking.
Yeah. No. I know what you're saying, and I mean,
Yeah.
look, this is gonna be a long way till we correct any of this, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is just. I mean, it's just this is like when it rains, it pours situation. I mean, like wrestling. We've come a long way since WrestleMania getting canceled. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long
Yeah.
10 years.
Oh,
I know, right? So, I mean, look, I know a lot of you have been struggling to even enjoy wrestling at all right now,
Yeah.
let alone with this. I mean, we have the debut of Matt Riddle, and it's marred by that. It's just, a bunch of bad news. But ultimately, there'll come growth from all this stuff. Unfortunately, it won't help like the victims of COVID-19 and all these sexual allegations.
Right.
You know.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know what WB's response is going to be. You know, maybe they got to shut down the wrestling for now.
You think?
I mean, I get it because they want to pay these guys, but maybe, yeah. I mean, they are like one of the only closed set TV show happening. I don't know any others. Except
Hmm.
for the news, right?
Right.
Anyway, look. Um, Hopefully everything falls into place. There's nothing I can really say to like end this. I'm trying to like end on like a high
Yeah.
note. This is just this is just a fucking weird. This is a weird week among weird months. I
Yeah.
mean,
Definitely.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, we're not gonna talk about specific wrestling stuff, and I'm not gonna put out a Patreon AEW NXT episode this week. I think we should at least take this week to acknowledge what happened here, so it does not swept under the rug, and hopefully we could see some kind of action here.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna give up on wrestling. I'll tell you that. Like, I mean, it's too good of a thing, and you know what I mean. It's great, and then also, who's gonna, you know, who's gonna take it into account? You know what I mean?
Right.
Right.
And I don't think this is a wrestling problem. I think this is I don't think
Yeah.
this is a problem across the board in society, at all levels, in every company, everything. So we'll see what happens from here, and we'll keep track of it, and then we'll watch Fighter Fest.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to add?
No,
No.
covered it.
Yeah. All right, everybody.
All right.
Well, I think we had a good discussion about this stuff, and yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's really hard, especially when it's like you're like, oh, there's a wrestler that I really love, and like I was always eyeing up David Starr. I mean, I was never a big Joey Ryan guy. But Matt Riddle. I mean, we'll be talking about for months on this podcast. I'm just talking about how I think he's like the guy.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I don't see how you go from this to be, and then what happens if he gets this Goldberg match that we want, and this is just swept under the rug? You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Is it like, oh well, hey, we just call this woman a stalker, and then he gets to go have these big matches? Like, how do we feel about that?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll track it. We're not going to solve it tonight, but we will, or ever. But yeah. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening to the podcast, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and maybe we'll keep it going in the Facebook group if you got some stuff to say, and hopefully we get back to two wrestlers of great character wrestling in front of 100,000 people for a piece of gold.
Right.
Mhm.
All right, everybody. Keep watching
All right.
wrestling. And kisses. Cheers up.
Bye.
Bye.